en lo que es el saque de Carlos Alcaraz del año pasado respecto a esta temporada. Bueno, te diría de las últimas semanas ahora, porque prácticamente lo han hecho en unas semanitas.
Corretja does not usually sound worried on radio, but late April, Cadena Cope, one sentence about Alcaraz, I have no idea how far along his recovery is. Feliciano Lopez, talking wrists. Jose Moran posting updates. Wimbledon going ahead without its two-time champion. A former world number 2 admitting he is in the dark says plenty. Meanwhile, a different theory grew online, aimed at the father, the coach who built Carlos from age 4, the man whose club in El Palmar now stages every rehab session. The accusation writes itself, a frustrated ex-player who rushed his son back to training to protect a legacy. Here is what nobody tells you. When Corretja finally reveals why the timeline collapsed, the target of the blame changes completely. He suggests the public has never understood this injury. Tenosynovitis is not a bruise you shake off, it is a tendon problem with no calendar. By the end of this video, the villain you walked in expecting might be the only person protecting Carlos. Subscribe if you want tennis coverage that checks receipts, and drop your gut reaction below. I genuinely read them. Right then, time to walk slowly through the actual evidence, piece by piece. The evidence starts in Melbourne, 6 months before anyone typed an ugly word about the Alcaraz family. January 2026, Rod Laver Arena, and Carlos Alcaraz did something no man his age had ever done. He beat Novak Djokovic in 4 sets to win the Australian Open, completed the career Grand Slam at 22, and became the youngest male player in history to own all 4 majors. Think about what that actually means. Rod Laver needed his whole prime. Rafael Nadal got there at 24. Djokovic himself needed until 29. A kid from a farming suburb of Murcia did it before his 23rd birthday, then flew to Doha and won that title too, almost as an afterthought. At that moment, his celebrity machine was running at full throttle. Babolat had signed him at 10 years old, before he had even hit a growth spurt, and that racket deal has followed him from junior courts in Spain to 7 Grand Slam trophies. Nike builds entire campaigns around his outfits. His US Open kit for this summer already leaked online months in advance, which tells you something about demand. Sportswear leaks only happen when millions of people care what a player will wear before he has confirmed he can even play. Sponsors do not leak gear for injured athletes they doubt. They leak it for kings they expect back on the throne. Except the throne had already started wobbling, and here the hungry challenger enters the frame. Jannik Sinner had spent the spring circling. In Monte Carlo, the Italian beat Alcaraz in the final, took the trophy, and ripped the world number 1 ranking out of his hands in a single afternoon. That defeat stung more than a normal final. Sinner is not just a rival, he is the other half of the defining rivalry of this generation, a man Alcaraz has faced 17 times and leads 10-7. Every point between them carries the weight of an era. So when Alcaraz arrived in Barcelona in mid-April, he was a wounded king in the rankings sense already, desperate to respond on home soil, on the clay where he had built his legend. April 14th is the date that broke the season. First round of the Barcelona Open against Otto Virtanen, a match Alcaraz won comfortably in straight sets. Routine on the scoreboard, anything but routine on the court, because midway through he called a medical timeout and had his forearm treated. Fans in the stands barely registered it. A rub, a wrap, play on. Within hours, the picture darkened. He withdrew from the rest of the tournament citing a wrist problem nobody could name yet, and then the dominoes started falling in a sequence that got scarier with each announcement. Madrid, gone. Rome, gone, a title he was defending. Roland Garros, gone. Another title defense abandoned before the draw was even made. By May, the unthinkable arrived. Queens and Wimbledon both scratched, meaning the 2-time Wimbledon champion and defending finalist would watch the grass season from his couch in Murcia. Journalist Angel Garcia of Cadena Cope eventually put a name to the monster: tenosynovitis, an inflammation of the tendon sheath in the right wrist. The first scan looked manageable. A second scan a week later did not, showing significant inflammation with the potential to spiral into something career-altering if mishandled. And here sits the detail that matters more than any other fact in this story. Tenosynovitis has no defined recovery timeline. None. A doctor cannot circle a date on a calendar and promise the tendon will cooperate. Nadal battled the same category of problem years ago and chose the conservative route: rest, immobilization, ice, patience measured in months rather than weeks. Alcaraz's camp chose the same path. No surgery, no shortcuts, just a splint that ran from his hand nearly to his elbow and a long, silent wait. Silence. Remember that word, because silence is where this entire controversy was born. Team Alcaraz went quiet. His people confirmed later that he deliberately avoided media appearances because he wanted privacy during the most delicate stretch of rehabilitation. A reasonable choice for a human being, a dangerous one for a superstar, because the internet does not tolerate an information vacuum around a 7-time major champion. Where facts go missing, theories move in, and the theories that grew around this injury needed a face. They found one at the family dinner table. To understand why, you need the father's story told properly. Carlos Alcaraz Gonzalez was a genuinely talented tennis player in his own youth, good enough to dream about the professional tour. He never got there. Money killed the dream. His family simply could not afford the travel, the coaching, the endless costs of building a pro career, and as a teenager, he walked away from his own ambition. He became a coach instead, then a club administrator at the Real Sociedad Club de Campo de Murcia, a place where his own father and great-uncle had been members. Tennis runs through that bloodline like a genetic condition. When his second son was 4 years old, he bought the boy a racket and put him on those same courts in El Palmar. At 10, the kid signed with Babolat. At 11, an IMG agent named Albert Molina watched him play and started pursuing the family. The father held out until Carlos was 12, then agreed. From that point forward, he has been a constant presence at tournaments, usually a few seats from Álvaro, the eldest brother who works as Carlos's hitting partner. Now overlay the injury onto that biography and watch how easily suspicion assembles itself. A man who lost his own career to circumstance, a son worth hundreds of millions in future earnings, sitting idle while Sinner cements the #1 ranking. Rehab sessions staged not at Juan Carlos Ferrero's academy in Villena, where Alcaraz has trained since he was 15, but at El Palmar, the father's home turf, the family club, the place where the father holds influence. Training videos surfacing on Instagram, while Spanish media openly reported that final medical clearance had not yet been granted. And when the July 9th footage dropped, the clip that showed Carlos back on court with a racket in his right hand, sharp-eyed fans noticed who was running the session. Álvaro was there. Samuel Lopez, the coach, was there. Juanjo Moreno, the physio, was there. The father was nowhere in frame, and absence reads as guilt to a suspicious audience. Why hide, people asked, unless there was something to hide? The theory hardened into a narrative you could find in reply sections and fan forums across the tennis internet. A frustrated ex-player pushing his boy back onto the practice court too early, gambling a golden wrist to protect a legacy and a rankings position, doing through his son what life never let him do himself. It is a clean story. It has a motive, an opportunity, and a shadowy setting. It sounds like the truth, and every single load-bearing beam in it collapses the moment an actual expert opens his mouth. Àlex Corretja picked up the phone for Spanish radio at the end of April, and this is where the case against the father begins to die. Understand who is talking here. Corretja reached world #2, played 2 Roland Garros finals, and has spent his second career as one of the most respected analysts in the sport, the man Eurosport trusts to explain Spanish tennis to the world. When he discusses a wrist, people in locker rooms listen, and his message delivered across those radio appearances was not an accusation aimed at anyone in Murcia. It was a shield raised in front of them. Maximum patience, he said. Focus on the day-to-day. Let the tendon heal as well as it possibly can, and do not set a specific date. He went further and, this next part is the sentence that should have ended the conspiracy on the spot. There is no need to pressure Carlos about his return date. He should come back when he feels ready. Read that again slowly. The supposed bombshell insider was publicly begging the world to take pressure off the player, which is the exact opposite of what you say if you believe the family's applying pressure from inside the house. His honesty about the fog was just as revealing. Corretja admitted openly that he had no idea how far along the recovery actually was, that he wanted Carlos back as much as any fan, and that in his view, the team was respecting prudent timelines it had set for itself. Announcing the Roland Garros withdrawal so early, he argued, was itself proof of calm. You only surrender a Grand Slam title defense weeks in advance when you have decided that healing outranks glory. Then he explained the part almost nobody watching from outside had grasped, the reason he doubted Wimbledon from the start. Grass punishes wrists, the ball skids low and arrives faster, serves come through hotter, and players get forced into awkward, reactive movements that load exactly the tendon Alcaraz was trying to protect. Rushing back on that surface would be closer to sabotage than ambition. His verdict, stripped to its core, was that the public simply did not understand this injury. Not the anatomy, not the absence of a timeline, not the stakes of getting it wrong. He was not alone on that broadcast. Feliciano Lopez, three-time Wimbledon quarterfinalist and now the Madrid Open tournament director, revealed that he had suffered a practically identical injury during his own career and described the wrist as one of the most treacherous joints in tennis, a dense little machine of small bones, tendons, and sheaths where inflammation lingers and relapses punish impatience brutally. Two decorated Spanish professionals, both intimately familiar with the tour, both preaching the same gospel of caution, neither hinting, even faintly, at recklessness inside the Alcaraz camp. And once you know what caution actually looks like, the so-called suspicious evidence flips its meaning entirely. Those early training clips that theorists waved around as proof of rushing? Watch them properly. Alcaraz was hitting balls left-handed. His right arm, the money arm, stayed completely out of the action while he used a technique called cross-education, training the opposite limb to keep his nervous system sharp without loading the injured joint. That is not a shortcut, that is textbook, borderline obsessive rehabilitation discipline. At the end of May, a video went viral from his holiday in Portugal, shared by the Tennis Letter, showing him with a dramatically smaller wrist support after weeks in that near-full arm cast. Fans celebrated it as a comeback signal. Medically, it signaled something better. The swelling was retreating on schedule precisely because nobody had forced the tendon to work before its time. Every step forward passed through a doctor's hands first. Spanish outlets reported that Alcaraz traveled repeatedly to Barcelona for evaluations with Dr. Ángel Cotorro, and that permission to progress, from movement work to holding a racket, from shadow swings to gentle contact, was granted checkpoint by checkpoint. Journalist José Morón, the reporter closest to this story all spring, published a detailed update on June 3rd explaining that the team's wish was intense training in July and a return in August, while warning everyone to stay calm, avoid rushing, and mark no dates on any calendar because the wrist's response to real hitting remained unknown. Sit that reporting next to the conspiracy theory and notice the collision. The people with actual access described a camp moving slower than fans wanted, not faster than doctors allowed. Which brings us back to the spine of this whole saga, the July 9th Instagram post, and now you can see it with clean eyes. On the right track, the caption said. In the footage, the 7-time Grand Slam champion practices his forehand with a racket that has no strings in it, an incomplete frame chosen deliberately so he could rehearse the mechanics of his swing without a single gram of ball impact traveling up through the tendon. A man being rushed does not swing a hollow racket. A man being rushed is drilling full-pace cross-court forehands and booking flights. And the same day that video appeared, his name vanished from the Montreal entry list. His camp sacrificed the Canadian Masters, 1,000 ranking points on the table, choosing 2 extra weeks of preparation over a risky return, with Cincinnati penciled in as the realistic comeback. Rushing has never in the history of sport looked like voluntarily skipping a Masters event. Even the El Palmar mystery dissolves under ordinary light. Why rehab at the family club instead of Ferrero's academy? Because rehab is not training. A player relearning to trust his own wrist needs privacy, familiar walls, family within arm's reach, and freedom from cameras. And no place on earth offers Carlos Alcaraz those things like the courts where he first held a racket at 4 years old. La Verdad reported that once his final medical check cleared, he would be authorized to resume training at 100% in El Palmar, which means the medical establishment itself signed off on the location the internet found so sinister. The father's absence from the July footage was not concealment. His son's professional rehab was being run by professionals exactly as it should be, while the man who built him stayed where he has always stayed, close, quiet, out of the spotlight. So if the father is innocent, who actually did this to Alcaraz? Two answers, and both are bigger than any one person. The first is his own genius. Former Roland Garros and Wimbledon finalist Olga Morozova put it plainly this summer when she warned coaches about young players copying his game. Because that impossible whip of a forehand, the disguise on the drop shot, the spin nobody else generates, all of it runs through extreme wrist action, and the very mechanism that makes him magical is the mechanism that broke. His style carries its own tax, and this spring the bill arrived. The second culprit is the calendar he now stares down. While he swung his stringless racket, Sinner marched through the Wimbledon semi-finals against Djokovic, tightening his grip on number one. Alexander Zverev, hungrier than he has ever been, won Roland Garros in Paris over Flavio Cobolli, reached the Wimbledon final, and climbed within touching distance of the number 2 ranking. Alcaraz must defend 3,000 points from his Cincinnati and US Open titles almost immediately upon return. That, right there, is the pressure. Not a father's whisper, but a sport that never stops moving while a tendon insists on stillness. Legendary coach Rick Maxey, the man who shaped the Williams sisters and Roddick, gave the verdict that history will likely keep. Smart, he called it, playing the long game. He praised a competitor who probably wants to play more than anyone alive for accepting that the only way back to must-see TV is through boredom, discipline, and restraint. And that is the final quiet twist of this investigation. The father who supposedly rushed his son is the same man who once watched money strangle his own career, who understands better than anyone on this planet what it costs to lose tennis before you are finished with it. Everything visible from the outside, the surrendered slams, the skipped masters, the hollow racket, the doctors gating every step, points to a family protecting a wrist like it is the crown jewel of the sport, because it is. Corretja saw that from the very beginning. He told us the injury was misunderstood, and he was right, but the deeper thing we misunderstood was the man raising the player. Alcaraz built his whole identity on joy, and joy is exactly what those El Palmar videos show waiting under the surface. Coiled, patient, ready for Cincinnati. When he finally uncorks that forehand again, remember who refused to let the world hurry it. If this breakdown changed the way you saw this story, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me whether you bought the theory before today, and share this with the fan who still believes it, because somebody owes a quiet apology to a father in Mercia.